Okay, so you all heard that. So we are recording, this is the second session in our 4-part series on abortion. And tonight we have really, you're very privileged because one of our speakers was just cited in the New York Times. The other speaker was not cited by name, but the kind of work she does was discussed. So we have Professor Carol Joffe, who is a sociologist, emerita from UC Davis, and now a professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences at USCSF. And she's really spent her whole career. She's done a few other things, but mostly her career has been focused on the social, cultural, public health, societal aspects of abortion. She's written 2 books, one called Doctors of Conscience, The Struggle to Provide Abortion Before and After Roe v. Wade, and the other one, Dispatches from the Abortion Wars, The Cost of Fanaticism to Doctors, Patients, and the Rest of Us. So I think the titles give you some sense of where she's coming from in terms of her views, but she will speak about it longer. And our second presenter, Dr. Debbie Bamberger, is a nurse practitioner who is in the field. She works at Planned Parenthood in East Oakland. She lives here in Berkeley, and she has been an abortion provider for many years, and she will talk about both the actual experience of working with clients, but also about how her Jewish upbringing and her Jewish values animate this work, so that you'll get an opportunity to hear what it's like to actually be providing abortions to very vulnerable women right here in our own backyard or front yard, depending on where you live. So just one quick heads up that next week we have a sort of different perspective. We're going to have, if you will, an online gallery talk about a book called Focus on Abortion, which is a spectacular photography book of portraits of women and men, as you'll see, who have sought or had abortions, with personal stories and personal statements. And that's by a photographer named Rosalind Banish. And the last session will be on the 22nd. It will be about the legal implications of the possibly repeal of Roe v. Wade. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Carol. Go ahead and start us on today's journey.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rachel, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I look forward to becoming part of the Lehr House community as a consumer, not just as a provider. Okay, and let me start my talk with a trigger warning. I have nothing but very depressing things to say to you all. We are really in trouble, more so than I actually had realized till recently. The corrective to my depressing talk, fortunately, the second half, you'll hear from Debbie, and truly the only positive thing that I can think of at this moment in the world of abortion provision is the extraordinary dedication of abortion providers, both in blue states, who will be getting a lot more patients than they are used to, as well as those in red states who are in the very heartbreaking situation of having to close their clinics. Okay, so we are, and here is the only Jewish contribution of my talk, we are all sitting on shpilkes, waiting to hear what the court is going to do. For anybody who doesn't know what shpilkes is, it means sitting on pins and needles. Okay, so anytime now, but most likely at the end of June, we'll hear from the court. It is widely believed, especially after the leak of the of Alito's draft, which occurred May 2nd. Debbie and I and many others at that moment, literally on May 2nd, were returning from a meeting of the National Abortion Federation. And as we were sitting on the plane, we all got the news. So Alito's draft makes very clear that he and 4 others are ready to overturn Roe. And that's probably what is going to happen. I mean, even before the leak of his draft, I mean, last September, now almost 9 months ago, Texas passed a law that was blatantly unconstitutional. Roe is at this moment in time the law of the land. Texas basically made abortions almost impossible to get. And the court had numerous opportunities to overturn it, and they didn't. So this clearly seems like a court that's ready to do that. So what does that mean? It means that about half the states will either immediately or shortly thereafter ban abortion. As the red states are becoming redder, we have blue states that are becoming bluer. New York, Massachusetts, Colorado, Connecticut, they have all recently passed legislation attempting to enshrine abortion in their constitutions and protect abortion providers. So for example, if a woman from Texas or a person from Texas comes to somebody in California or Colorado for an abortion, what these states are, what the blue states are trying to do is saying, no, these providers cannot be extradited. But I should say, and of course I'm not a lawyer, perhaps we have some lawyers on this call, we don't know. I mean, there's a lot, at this moment in time, there is so much about the legal environment we just don't know. So in the short run, about half the states will ban, the other half, more or less, the other half won't. In the long run, it could get even worse. You might recall that shortly after the draft was leaked on May 2nd, Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, was asked, will Republicans, assuming they gain control of the House and the Senate and the presidency, will you go for a national ban? And he did not rule it out. So that's really a disaster scenario. The Republicans take over, they have the presidency. In a nanosecond, they do what the Democrats have been unable to do, namely to overturn the filibuster. And they could do that. And they might. And it's quite possible that as early as November 2024, a Republican president is elected. Sorry to scare the hell out of you, but that's my job. Another disaster scenario is fetal personhood. For years, the anti-abortion movement has tried to make the argument that a fetus has the constitutional protection of a person. Many people find this idea ridiculous. People make jokes. If you are pregnant with a fetus, can you drive in the carpool lane? Can you take a tax deduction? But there's a very serious element to this. If this Supreme Court, which appears to be the most radical court we've ever had, should find for fetal personhood, then abortion is murder. I mean, you don't murder persons in this country. So if they are persons, forget about California and Colorado and Massachusetts. Okay, so those are some of the very frightening scenarios. But let's talk about now what will happen on the ground. What does this, assuming an overturn of Roe, what's August or July 2022 in the world of abortion gonna look like? And the first thing I should say is there's a lot of legal confusion, as I mentioned before. Certain things are simply not clarified. Let me give you an example. Today in the state of Missouri, there's only one abortion clinic that barely does any abortions because it has been so inappropriately regulated. The legislature has made the doctors there do procedures that the medical profession doesn't think are reasonable. So except for very, very sick women who need hospital abortions, what the Planned Parenthood in Missouri tells patients who call is go over 10 minutes over the bridge to Granite City, Illinois, where Illinois has very progressive abortion laws. Go get your abortion there. And thousands of women for the last number of years have been doing that. The state of Missouri recently proposed the legislature recently proposed legislation that said a woman in Missouri, if abortion is illegal in Missouri, going to another state is not okay. This is unprecedented legal territory, and we actually don't know how that will come out. One of the things that I worry about most when I think about what the landscape of abortion is going to be is what's going to happen to very, very sick women. And again, we don't know, but here's what worries me. Even in states that ban abortion, in theory, they will have an exception for the threats to the life of a woman or a person or a pregnant person. However, that can be a very subjective thing. It's not always clear exactly when, if someone is very ill, it's not exactly clear exactly when she'll die. So the nightmare scenario that I visualize is pro-choice doctors and anti-choice doctors and hospital counsel and hospital administrators terrified of offending the state legislature, arguing about, oh, is she going to die? Is she not going to die? And while they're arguing, she very likely will die. We've already heard some extremely upsetting stories out of Texas. A woman whose water broke, and as Debbie can tell us, that's a very early in pregnancy. That's a dangerous situation. I mean, not super early, but before a fetus is viable. A woman whose water broke went to a hospital in Texas. Her doctor was very sympathetic, but the hospital would not allow her to do an abortion. This woman was really ill. It was not clear whether she was going to go into labor or what. So the doctor said, go on an airplane, fly to another state, make sure your cell phone has a lot of battery so I can talk to you while you're on the plane. Make a ticket at the front of the plane because you might need the bathroom a lot if if you actually start to pass the fetus. I mean, this is America in 2022. We are putting very sick people on airplanes to fly to another state because the doctors understandably are terrified of years of jail time and hundreds of thousands of dollars of fine. Okay, so how is the movement responding? I mean, the pro-choice movement. Several ways. There's a tremendous fundraising going on. No doubt many of you have heard from various organizations. This money will be used to transport people from hostile states to so-called haven states. California is preparing to accept many people. And actually, some analyses that I've heard, even though California is extremely willing to do so, I mean, the governor has been very proactive. There's something called the Council on the Future of Abortion in California. Probably not that many women will come to, some of course will, some will come to Southern California from Arizona, but the real receiver states will most likely be in the middle of the country. Illinois, Colorado, Pittsburgh has been flagged as an important point because women from Michigan and Ohio will likely go there. So there's a lot of planning going on. I have been talking to abortion providers in both blue states and red states, asking them how they are preparing. Someone in the middle of the country said to me, it's gonna be a tsunami. We'll do our best, but it's gonna be a tsunami. I mean, thousands of people will be moving. Now, not everybody will be able to travel, even with funding. If you have 3 children at home, if you're working and you can't afford you can't find anybody to take care of your kids, and 60% of abortion patients are already parents. If you can't afford to take time off from work because you'll lose the wages and you will be fired. And I should mention that the pool of abortion patients are disproportionately poor. 50% below the poverty line, another 25% just above it, disproportionately women of color. So one other option, and Rachel, I'll take about 3 more minutes, is that okay? Another option that many women and people will make use of is something we now refer to as, quote, self-managed abortion, medication abortion. It's done, which now accounts for about a little bit more than half of all abortions taking place in this country. Medication abortion pills can be ordered over the internet. And it's a very safe procedure. Even using only one of the medications involved is also very effective. Women in the Southwest can cross the border into Mexico and buy one of these drugs over the counter. So when we think about, and many of us in Rachel's and my demographic remember the days before Roe. When we think of the pre-Roe era, the first thing that comes to mind for me is just how many women died, how many women were injured. And women was the only word we used then to refer to abortion patients. So that's what I'll use talking about then. So it was a very difficult, scary environment. All kinds of people were providing abortions illegally. Some were very decent. Rachel was kind enough to mention a book I wrote called Doctors of Conscience. These were doctors who were well-trained, were successful in mainstream medicine, but felt a deep commitment they weren't all Jewish, but the Jewish concept of tikkun olam would apply here. But there was also many bad providers, butchers they were called, and women, unethical and inept, some doctors, some not. The people who provided abortion before Roe illegally were very nervous, understandably. They were nervous about being detected. They were nervous about losing their license. They were nervous about going to jail. In retrospect, however, there was, relatively speaking, very little legal prosecution. Almost no women went to jail. A handful of doctors did, but mostly not. They were worried, but there was no anti-abortion movement. Therefore, there was no one to really pressure for having these people arrested. Okay, fast forward to what we can expect after Roe. And it's the mirror image of that. As I suggested, with medication abortion, there'll be much less death, much less injury. There'll be some people will still be very desperate and do foolish things like throwing themselves down the stairs or taking dangerous herbs or asking boyfriends to hit them in the belly. All these things took place before and they will take place again, but much less so. However, the real difference between then and the near future, there'll be much more legal surveillance. Now we have a highly developed anti-abortion movement. We've already seen cases of people arrested for attempting their own abortions. People have spent time in jail. A few weeks ago, a young woman in Texas, she was the mother of 2 children. On the day she was actually, her divorce became finalized, she took medication abortion pills. She got anxious because she felt she was bleeding too much. I don't know if she was or not. What these pills do is essentially cause a miscarriage. She went to a local emergency room. Women who take these pills are often counseled, don't tell people in the ER that you took these pills. Say you are having a miscarriage, because that's what you're having. The drugs you took cannot be detected. but she did. I mean, she was anxious. She felt she had to give full information. So she said that she took these pills. The ER staff did what we have all been dreading and what we assume will happen more and more, that somebody in the ER called the local police who came, arrested her. She spent 2 nights in jail. Then she was released. It turns out that Texas law at this moment does not allow for criminal charge against women having abortions. It allows for everybody else, the Uber driver who drives you to a clinic, the friend who helps you locate the pills. I mean, anybody who, quote, aids and abets an abortion under Texas's current law, even while Roe is still legally the law of the land, is subject. But so anyway, she was released. But that's, for many of us who study this field, that's the very, very dark future we see. I mean, a tremendous amount of legal surveillance, and we know who is most likely to be subject to this legal surveillance. So let me stop here. Thank you very much. I sorry for this depressing talk. Debbie will inspire us. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing. Rahel, do you have that slide I asked you to show?
Yes, I do. I could show it right now. Hold on one second.
Oh, or you can wait till after, Deb. I mean, I asked Rahel to show a slide. People, when I give talks like this, people often ask what they can do. So I have a slide with 2 things.
It doesn't hurt to show it twice.
Okay, fine, show it.
We'll just, people will bear with me for 1 second because it takes a second to post this. Okay, so let's leave it on for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, it's the second one, yeah.
The second one.
Yeah, so, okay, so in this slide,
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Rahel, it looks perfect. Okay, the first thing on the slide is the name of a local abortion fund. Abortion funds have been crucial, not just as Roe is going away, but even before then. So this is a fund in Oakland that helps patients with funding. Volunteers pick them up at bus stations, at airports. It now covers, it's based in Oakland, but covers all of California. The second recommendation I have, and this is one of many, there are many, many worthy, reliable funds. This is one I personally particularly like. This is a patient assistance fund of the National Abortion Federation. It's named after Dr. George Tiller, who was a friend and colleague of mine. Some of you may remember that in 2009, he was literally assassinated in his church. He was a hero to many, many of us. So anyway, these are 2 things you can do. Debbie may have further suggestions, but thank you, Rahel.
Okay, great. Here we are, we're back. And Debbie, go ahead and start your presentation. Thank you so much, Carol.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Yes, it's depressing what you have to say, but it's really important for people to hear it also. So I appreciate your spelling everything out like that. So I'm Debbie Bamberger. I'm a nurse practitioner and abortion provider at Planned Parenthood Marmonte. I work at our East Oakland clinic. I was actually the first nurse practitioner in the state of California to be legally trained to provide first trimester in-clinic abortion procedures. And that I was in a research study when I was first trained, and the results of that research study were then used in 2014 to change the law in California. There was a physician-only law in California, and that was changed to allow nurse practitioners, nurse midwives, and physician assistants to do first trimester abortions here in California. So I'm very proud of that work. And I've been doing abortions for about 16 years or so. I want to just give you a little bit of a sense of what my work is like and where my Jewish grounding comes into it. So when I first began training to do abortions, I had already been in practice as a nurse practitioner for about 10 years. And I was really stunned by the power of this experience. So I did lots of wonderful preventive health care, took care of patients, giving lots of birth control, treating sexually transmitted infections, et cetera. But there is nothing else in my practice that has the power to change a person's life in the 5 to 10 minutes that I spend with them. And being able to do that for another person, I can't even describe it. It's so moving. It's so powerful. And I do and would sometimes feel that there was like a divine light coming down in the exam room to me and my patient, because people are so relieved when somebody is pregnant and they don't want to be, and you help them to not be pregnant. It's divine. And I can't say that everywhere, but I'm hoping that you can take it in the, how I mean it. So several years ago, I organized a reproductive justice panel at my synagogue. Carol, I believe you spoke at it. And it was a really interesting discussion. And afterwards, one of the doctors, who's a friend of mine, an abortion provider who spoke at the panel, asked me if she thought my rabbi would be willing to sit down and have a conversation with her about abortion and Judaism and the Torah, which he definitely was. And I was there with them, and we had a very rich discussion. And I decided, maybe other Jewish abortion provider friends of mine would be interested in learning about these things. And so I asked every Jewish abortion provider I know in the Bay Area if they would be interested in this Jewish study group for abortion providers. And I thought I'd get a handful, and every single person said yes. So people were hungry for this information. And some of that has been, we talked about it last week, kind of where abortion is in the Torah, or where the thinking about abortion is in the Torah. But we spent 10 weeks together looking from the Torah all the way down to modern commentaries about abortion, and really delving into Jewish texts about abortion. And it was so enriching. I think all of us felt like we are doing this work as a spiritual practice, and having the information from our heritage to guide us and show us that we are doing something that's not only permissible, but also a mitzvah in certain situations. It was really a very enriching experience. And I think everyone who was there, it's been several years since we stopped meeting, but it really affected everyone. So I wouldn't say that I have very many Jewish patients, but as a Jewish person providing abortion, I feel that my work is sort of imbued with my Jewish values. I'm very passionate about the abortion work that I do, and just the reproductive justice work that I do. I started volunteering at a Planned Parenthood in Worcester, Massachusetts when I was in college, when I was 19 years old. And now I'm 55 and still back at Planned Parenthood working in abortion. So, my grandmother, who died when I was 14, donated to Margaret Sanger's first clinic in New York City. And my mother told me about that. And my mother also told me about her own experience going to that first Planned Parenthood clinic when she was 19 to get a diaphragm. And so I feel like there is this history in my ancestry of supporting abortion, supporting women's right to autonomy. And I feel like driven to it. It's very meaningful work. I'm also, there's so much solidarity right now in the abortion provider community. We are all so devastated by what's about to happen. And so many people are interested in either training to learn how to do abortions, or figuring out where they can go to do abortions, or, it's really, there's a lot of energy around what we as providers can do. And I'm very lucky to live in California because abortion is always going to be protected here. My affiliate, which is Planned Parenthood Marmonte, is gearing up to be able to take on 200 to 500 more abortion patients per week when Roe is overturned. So we are really getting our ducks in a row to be able to handle what may or may not be a big onslaught in Northern California, but we are going to be ready. So I'm proud of being at a Planned Parenthood where we're able to prepare. And I hope to be able to keep doing this work forever. And I don't have too much else to say about it, but I'm really open to your comments or questions or having a discussion about what it's like to be an abortion provider. I love to talk about it. So that's my story.
Thank you so much. So we are going to open it up to a discussion now. And we much prefer for people to raise their hands rather than put things in the chat. If you have questions and you really don't want to speak up, please do put it in the chat. But if you're willing to raise your hand, we would greatly appreciate that. If you don't remember how to do that, at the bottom of your screen where the strip is with all the stuff, towards the right, there's a round button with some plus next to it that says reactions. You click on that and it brings up several options, and one of them is raise hand, and you click that and then we see you, and here we go. We've got two people who are, I think, over the age of 25, 3 people who figured out how to do it. So good for you. And what's also wonderful is that the Zoom immediately put you in the order in which you raised your hands. So I will call on people, and please, in most of our session, I say that the definition of a question is a very brief sentence with a question mark at the end. But I think in this particular conversation, we will take both questions and comments. So Nancy, you start.
3 questions, please. The first one is, do we put any energy into not getting pregnant? That's the first question. Second question is, do we ever get asked to have our tubes tied or have the male disconnect the vas deferens? And the third question, which is personal to me, is Texas allowing a child who is physically normal but mentally very retarded to get shots to not have a menstrual cycle come on?
I can definitely talk about the first 2. I don't know what Texas is doing about that. So we are putting a lot of effort into contraception. Modern methods of contraception are very safe and very available. Many people who become pregnant are using some method of contraception. So methods do fail. But we have many methods available that usually somebody can find one that is going to work for them. And yes, we probably will need to even put more effort into making contraception even more accessible and affordable. That's another thing. We don't have universal health care, and getting an IUD, for example, if you don't have any insurance, can be $1,000. In terms of permanent sterilization, either vasectomy or tubal ligation, yes, that is available and people can choose to do that. But there are also what we call long-acting reversible methods now, like the IUD and the implant, which work for some up to 12 years. So you can get a reversible birth control method for many, many years that's close to 100% effective. So that's another really good option for people. I don't know about forcing people with disabilities to get a depot shot. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, Carol.
I know it happens in some places. It's been, as you might imagine, very controversial. Often the parents are terrified that, you know, their adult daughter with perhaps a mental age of a toddler, you know, if she were to get pregnant, it would be devastating. So it could be, I mean, I think it's a fascinating question of medical ethics. I mean, and I don't know what the rule is at this moment in time in Texas. I suspect that since Texas has such an aversion to any kind of reproductive health intervention, that probably that doesn't occur there. But I don't know. But I do want to add something to what Debbie said, and it goes back to Nancy's first question. I mean, one thing to realize is the number of abortions has been going down quite dramatically the last number of years. One reason is people are better contraceptors. I mean, the long-acting reversible contraception that Debbie mentioned is extraordinarily effective. It can last up to 10 years, perhaps even more, Deb. 12, okay. So another reason the number of abortions are going down is a lot of clinics have been closing. A third reason the official number of abortions are going down is what I mentioned earlier, a slow but steady rise in what I referred to as, quote, self-managed abortions. They don't show up in any kind of official government figure. So both for, quote, good reasons, namely better contraception, and for not such good reasons, the enormous difficulties people have, even while Roe is still legal. I mean, there's about 6 or 7 states today that have one clinic. And in fact, Oklahoma, I think, just got the honor of being the state with no clinic.
Thank you. Julie, go ahead. Ask your question. Unmute yourself.
There we go. So excuse my ignorance, but can you explain to me a little bit about self-managed abortions and how easy or not easy is it for women to get the drug or the medication that they need? And is it only for, let's say, early pregnancy? I know nothing about that. So it would just be good if I was a little bit better educated.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So most self-managed abortion refers to medication abortion, which is a combination of 2 medications, usually mifepristone and misoprostol. The mifepristone, RU486, as it was originally called, is first taken, and that stops the pregnancy from progressing. And then the second medication, misoprostol, is taken the next day, and that makes the uterus contract and expel the pregnancy. Since COVID started, there are quite a few startups that have come into existence to do telehealth medication abortion. So you can get the medication abortion pills online by interacting with one of these telehealth medication abortion companies, and you either have a live conversation or even an asynchronous conversation, which is just over text, and then a mail order pharmacy sends you the pills. So that's sort of the legitimate way to have an abortion at home without having to have any interaction with a medical provider. But the second pill that I mentioned, misoprostol, which is a commonly used drug for ulcers, can be used alone to cause an abortion, but it's only about 85% effective, which 85% is either good or not good, depending on how you look at it. It's a lot better than nothing and not as good as 100%. But for people who are desperate to not be pregnant, the misoprostol will be fairly easy to obtain and take. Medication abortion is done in this country up to about 11 weeks of pregnancy. We think that the medications may be effective further on and are used in other countries further on, but we're only using them in the first trimester here.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that the abortion providing community is very, I mean, given the reality that Roe will be overturned, the abortion, many, I can't, obviously I cannot speak for everybody, but many in the abortion providing community are very enthusiastic about self-managed abortion using these drugs. But some of my colleagues I work in a group at UCSF called Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health, known as ANSWER. And several of my colleagues did national studies asking people if they had tried to manage their abortions themselves. I mean, even while abortion is still legal, for some people it's cheaper, they don't like to go to clinics or they can't get to one. But I should emphasize that it's not only using these drugs. I mean, these drugs, which are available over the internet, initially when this first started, many in our field were worried, oh, people are going to be ripped off. They're going to order these drugs and get sugar pills. And that turns out not to be the case. I mean, a research group in New York actually ordered these various drugs from various groups and tested them. And yes, they were good. However, not every pregnant person knows about them. Some people will still do very unfortunate things, like I said before, hitting themselves, jumping downstairs. And another thing that I think really bears mentioning that I didn't get a chance to say before, because these drugs simulate a miscarriage, or I should say cause a miscarriage, what we are starting to see in this country and in other societies where abortion is absolutely banned, totally, El Salvador being the prime example, it turns out that women having authentic, genuine, non-medication abortion pills-induced miscarriages are very often suspected of having caused their miscarriages, even though they didn't. And I'm afraid that's going to be part of what we see in the years to come. Women going to hospitals saying, I'm having a miscarriage, and being grilled. Are you sure you didn't take anything? Did you do anything? So it's these pills will be a partial solution for some women, some people, but not for everybody. Especially those who don't find out they're pregnant till after 11 weeks, which is true of some people.
Sure. So as a follow-on question is, will there be support for these women who, if they have to go to the hospital because they're bleeding too much, or what I knew back in my day is, let's say, an incomplete miscarriage. I'm not sure that term is still used, but will there be somebody, let's say from Planned Parenthood, who goes with them to help them navigate all those questions? I'm just curious because
it depends on the state.
Yeah.
I'm afraid also that people will be afraid to go to the hospital and could hemorrhage at home because of fear of
that's right. Yeah.
Prosecuted, even if they're having a genuine miscarriage.
Yeah.
It's really scary.
Yeah. Alexis, you're on next. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So I also have 3 questions. Hopefully 2 of them are on the shorter side. One, there's a vast number of organizations that we can donate to, which makes it very hard to choose where to put your money. So are there a handful of them, Planned Parenthood, Marmonte in particular? Is it more of the mail order availability? Where should we be putting our money as a community? Should we be putting it locally? Should we be putting it toward the blue states that border red states, things like that? So how do we manage our money? If you go one step further, if, in the climate revolution, it's like eat less meat, drive less, and fly less, are there a couple of things that you can practically do that go one step further than donations? And then thirdly, Debbie, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the takeaways that you had from your Torah conversations in particular, as it relates to what stuck with you, and what are pieces of wisdom that you might be able to impart to the group?
Sure. So just to your first question, I actually discourage people from donating to Planned Parenthood. I probably shouldn't say that as a Planned Parenthood employee, but Planned Parenthood is very, very well funded. And a lot of the money that's donated to Planned Parenthood goes to political advocacy and not to actual patients who need to get to actual abortion appointments. Abortion funds, and two of them Carol put up on her slide, abortion funds help actual people get to actual abortion appointments. So our local fund, as Carol mentioned, is Access Reproductive Justice. You can Google them and donate there. And if you donate to Access, you're not only helping people locally, although people in farther out California do have a hard time getting to a place where they can get an abortion, but the abortion funds do work together and do sort of warm handoffs from one to the other when somebody needs to get someplace and needs funding. The National Network of Abortion Funds, which is also Googleable, is a sort of umbrella organization of almost all of the abortion funds. So if you go to the National Network of Abortion Funds, you can donate to particular states' abortion funds, or you can just donate to NANAF, we call it, and then they will distribute the money. But abortion funds are really where it's at in terms of something concrete that you can do with your philanthropic dollars.
So I will change my Planned Parenthood current abortion or current donation to one of those. Good to know. That's exactly what I wanted to know.
Yeah. And I think people really, Planned Parenthood is such a known name that people think I'm going to give my money there. And that's why I like to have the opportunity to talk about it. The second part of your question was about what you can actually do besides give money. Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness.
If there is, yeah.
Well, there is. I mean, the Access Fund that we've been talking about, they don't just raise money. I mean, COVID screwed it up a little bit but pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, if that is such a thing, as I said before, I mean, a lot of people come from other places in California come to the Bay Area. The Women's Option Center at UCSF is really one of the most respected abortion clinics anywhere. The Access Fund works very closely with UCSF, with that clinic. People are organized to go meet people, host them, drive them. I mean, I was somehow involved a number of years ago. I had a friend who ran a clinic in Florida. She had a patient who had a very complicated pregnancy. She was very difficult to get her pregnancy in Florida. Someone could have done it, but they were going to charge thousands. Anyway, long story short, the various abortion funds, including from the National Abortion Federation, flew this woman, who had never been in an airplane, told her how to do an airplane. You have to have an ID and so forth. Volunteers organized by the Access Fund met this woman, hosted her, brought her to her appointment, drove her around Golden Gate Park, showed her San Francisco. So that certainly is an option for people who want to go one step beyond. And Debbie, I don't know, many independent clinics make use of escorts. I don't know if Planned Parenthood does or not. Escorts at the side of the clinic to help patients navigate the harassment that they often get.
Yeah, I've been very lucky at my current health center not to have very much protester presence. Some of our clinics seem to have a lot more, like San Mateo. I'm not sure why, but at the clinics where there are very aggressive protesters, we do have clinic escorts that help people get in. The other thing, I know this is kind of cliche, but vote. You have to vote. We have some really amazing bills going through the legislature in California right now because Newsom wants to make California an abortion sanctuary state. So just keep your eye out for the things that are happening in California and vote. That's
vote at every level, not this is the mistake. We Democrats, if I can be so presumptuous, and I apologize to anybody who's not a Democrat, but I mean, Republicans vote for dog catcher, they vote for city council, they vote at every single level. And this affects abortion care. Local ordinances, local zoning committees have the power to say whether or not a clinic can open or not open. So it is essential to vote, not just president and Congress and senator, every single level.
I just want to add to that in addition to that, there is still a stigma, even within the very liberal Jewish community here in the Bay Area, of talking about abortion, not about abortion for other people. I think that that's completely kosher. But to actually stand up within your Jewish community and say, I've had an abortion, my best friend had an abortion, and to speak up about it is also something that we can do to deepen, I think, our own community's commitment to understanding how critical this issue is. Sue, you're next.
Wait, I wanted to respond to the question about my takeaways from our Jewish study group. I'm sorry.
Sorry, yes, please.
So, I mean, the first point, which I think many of us are aware of now, is that the only time that sort of abortion is even mentioned in the Torah is about that passage where if two men are fighting and the wife of one of the men gets injured and she was pregnant and she miscarries, then the person who injured her just has to pay a fine. But if she dies because she got injured, then it's an eye for an eye and the person is, it's murder. So that passage is proof, whatever, that a fetus does not have the same regard in the Torah as a woman, and that it's still considered sort of like a property at the stage that if that happens. The stuff that we read from the Mishnah and other and more modern commentators, I think my takeaway, I mean, it's been a while, and maybe Carol, you can add to this too, but basically, in reform and conservative movements, it's pretty straightforward that abortion is considered to be a decision between a person and their partner and their healthcare provider. I think in Orthodox communities, there is more subtlety there, and it's usually sort of decided more on a case-by-case basis, but that it's not outright banned in Orthodox circles. It's a conversation. It's not black and white. And I thought that was really interesting that, it's recognized that there's subtlety to people's situations, and that different people have different situations, and you have to have a conversation to figure out what the person's situation is. That's not very deep, but that really stuck with me.
Yeah, just to add to that, if you missed last week's session, we delved into that in quite a bit of detail, both in terms of the sort of canonical legal halachic texts, but also we had two women who are deeply engaged in the Orthodox community, not in the ultra-Orthodox community, in the what I would call modern Orthodox community, who spoke very eloquently about the issue in the Orthodox community, and very much in the spirit that Debbie is talking about, which is that it's not a simple thing. It's not a black and white thing. It's a conversation. It's a fraught, painful, difficult subject, and that the Orthodox community is, I think, if I speak for the most of the people who attended last week, surprisingly accepting of the need for abortion when the woman in question really needs an abortion. But in order to watch that, all you have to do is go to our website to where it says Learn with Us, look at past programs and videos, click on that, and it'll give you a list of all the preceding programs. They're in chronological order. So the most recent, so tomorrow morning, this program will be up there, but you click on that and you'll also see the link for last week's session. Sue, you're next.
Thank you for running this program. You were asking what you can do. What we can do is to destigmatize abortion. In general, everybody says, oh yeah, abortions are okay, but nobody wants to say, I had one. We need to find some celebrity who will come out and say, hey, I had an abortion. Somebody like a very well-known public figure or an actress or somebody. Imagine if Taylor Swift came out and said, I had an abortion. How about starting, instead of a pink ribbon or a yellow ribbon, some sort of purple ribbon? Wear a purple ribbon if you had an abortion. People say, well, abortions are bad, but Aunt Sally had one and Aunt Sally's okay. So maybe I need to rethink my position.
You know, our congresswoman, or I mean, if you live in Berkeley, our congresswoman, Barbara Lee, has been very open that she had an abortion. In fact, earlier this year, two other congresspeople, another one from the Bay Area, Jackie Speier, talked about her abortion. I mean, the thing, Sue, you're asking for periodically does happen.
But I'm asking for not periodically. What I'm asking for is for 100,000 people, 50 million women wearing ribbons.
Yes, no,
one celebrity to come out and say, this is what I'm asking everybody to start wearing ribbons.
From your mouth to God's ears, if the 50 million women who have had abortions since Roe, that would be great. I'm not sure one celebrity, I mean, we live in such a divided world. Somebody, Cher, for example, Cher, who many of us of a certain age and certain predisposition love, she's very pro-choice. She was in a movie a number of years ago where she portrayed an abortion doctor, and that made an enormous impression on people who like her. I mean, the problem is we live in a culture where there's not one unifying famous person who everybody likes. But Sue, your point that people who've had abortions and the men who benefited from these women having abortions, who did not have to become fathers before they were ready, did not have to stay in a relationship that maybe was not meant to be the long-term love of their lives and so forth. If everybody in this country who benefited from abortion would say so, I agree with you. It would be fantastic. I am not holding my breath for it to happen, but it's a wonderful idea.
There is more attention being paid in the abortion movement to storytelling and how important storytelling is for reducing stigma. You know, we say that 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in her lifetime. And so you know somebody who's had an abortion. You 100% know somebody who's had an abortion, and somebody you love has had an abortion. And without telling our stories, that people won't know that. So I absolutely agree that, you know, taking away the stigma and having people be able to share would make a huge difference.
Thank you. And I would like to add to that, that's part of what we're going to be doing next week. And I do want to mention Debbie Findling, who many of you may know as a consummate Jewish educator and now a philanthropy advisor with the Goldman Fund and other funds, wrote a piece in the Jewish Bulletin maybe 2 years ago, maybe even less, talking about her abortion. And I believe it was the first one in our community here, in our very liberal community, who, so to speak, came out of that closet and spoke about it publicly. And I completely agree with Sue that we need another wave of the Me Too movement. Sherry, you're on next.
Hi, regarding your comments on care for sick women, I was working at a hospital here in California in the South Bay a few years ago, and we had a patient with a fetal demise that needed basically the equivalent of an abortion, and we couldn't find, emergently at least, a staff physician who was trained. because they say it's no longer core curriculum at medical schools. It's now kind of an elective. And if abortion becomes less common in many states, is this going to be a problem? Is this true?
Well, where did you say this hospital was?
San Jose.
I'm sorry, say it again.
San Jose, California.
Oh, San Jose. No, that's
that's the story here. Yeah.
This is very sobering to hear. I mean, your general point, I mean, your particular point is very well taken and very disturbing. Your general point is also a very good one, that and will only get worse. I mean, when abortion is no longer legal in, let's say, Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama, the medical schools there will not be able to train. I mean, the particular procedure you were referring to, I believe, I mean, was it an induction that needed to happen, or was it a dilation and evacuation?
My problem is that I was peripheral. I'm a lab tech, not a nurse. So I see. You know, I'm hearing the story from a distance, but I am doing some of the testing, and I know that she's not getting what she's needing.
Yeah, no, that's very upsetting. I mean, only about, I don't know how many weeks pregnant this particular patient was.
About 6 months.
About 6 months, so 24 weeks, yeah.
You know, I don't know exactly. It's been a few years. Yeah,
but you know, when it gets to the third trimester, it becomes very specialized. Only about 1 to 1.5% of abortions take place after 20 weeks. So that helps explain why there's not all that much training in them. But that 1.5% desperately are often, not always, but often very sick women, or the fetus has no chance of surviving. If it will be born, it will be born gasping for air. And then, I'm sorry to be so graphic about this, but you know, and then it will die. So it's for that tiny, relatively speaking, tiny number of people, this is a very serious problem. And thank you, Sherry, for bringing it to our attention.
Debbie, did you want to add something?
No, I have nothing to add.
I do have a question for you, Debbie, because I see that at the moment there are not other raised hands. I'm curious if any of your patients have asked you about being Jewish and providing this care. Has it ever come from the patients that you've taken care of, kind of asking you about your religious background, how it plays out?
No, I've never been asked that. And usually I'm not really asked anything because people are fairly self-focused at the time of the procedure. The only time I was kind of regularly asked questions was when I was hugely pregnant and providing abortions, and people were curious about what it's like to be pregnant and be an abortion provider. And I really would appreciate those questions because, you know, I had two very desired pregnancies with my 2 teenagers that I have now. I've also had 2 abortions when I was younger, and I really wanted people to know that, you know, when a pregnancy is desired, it's desired, and when it's not desired, it's not desired. And I didn't have any ambivalence about providing abortion when I was pregnant. Oops, you're muted.
I invite other questions or comments. You know, it's not a surprise that most of the people in this session are women, but it's very heartening to see men as well, because one of the things, the delicate thing is that we want to protect the right of a woman to make that decision. And if she's in a relationship with a man who is not supportive, for whatever reasons, we want to protect her to have her independence to make that decision that is right for her. On the other hand, I think we also want men to take responsibility for whatever they contributed to the unwanted pregnancy and to encourage them to participate in a supportive way. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that aspect of working with the male partners?
Are you asking me?
Both of you, you and Carol, but you start, Debbie.
Well, I just want to mention one thing is that we are trying to be aware of gendered language and the idea that not everyone who is pregnant identifies as a woman. There are people who are born with a uterus who identify as a man or as gender non-binary. So I am trying to get away from the woman and man labeling. I think we are lucky to have a lot of men in our movement, both who are providers and who are supportive of the providers in their lives. So I just continue to encourage that. And I always appreciate when a male partner is involved and clearly there to support their partner.
You know, and I would just echo what you said, Rachel, that from the abortion providing community's point of view, it's a fine line, you know, wanting to make sure that the decision is ultimately the woman's or the pregnant person's. In fact, the standard of care in every abortion clinic I'm familiar with is to, at some point, if a pregnant person comes perhaps with their mother or with their partner, to speak to the person alone and just to make sure that this is her decision, that she's not being coerced. But at the same time, in my many years of studying abortion clinics and what goes on there, you know, I've seen enormous efforts at incorporating male partners when it is you know, when it is feasible. I mean, some people come to have abortions precisely because their relationship has broken down, or because, I mean, sometimes because of, let's say, domestic violence. In those cases, you don't want to inform the partner. So, I mean, I'm sure Debbie can speak to this from experience. I mean, I've just heard secondhand stories, you know, of women who come to abortion clinics, you know, and are desperate. Don't tell my husband or don't tell my boyfriend. He would kill me if he knew I was here. You know, the abortion providers have to negotiate the range of the kind of relationships that their patients have. But when it is feasible, and the same is true of contraception. I think Planned Parenthood has been a leader over the years in when working with teenagers, trying to get teenage boys involved, coming to the clinic, you know, not seeing the clinic as just a female space, coming there to support their female partners, but also to have themselves checked for STDs and so forth. So all of which is to say, when it is feasible, I think it's fair to say the reproductive health movement today really wants to involve women, men, gender non-binary people, and so on.
Thank you. Alexis, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a lot. So I have an unwoke question, which is about the non-binary language when it comes to what is traditionally a plumbing women's issue, right? I struggle that it might be a detraction from the women's issue of the right to choice by saying people. Is there truth to that? Is it actually a better idea to say pregnant people? Do you have thoughts on that? I'm curious.
We are trying to say pregnant people or people with a uterus. I don't think it takes away from what we would traditionally call women's issues. I don't know. My training, my licensure is as a women's health nurse practitioner. But in the past few years, I prefer to call myself a sexual and reproductive health nurse practitioner because I do see men I also provide gender affirming care for people who are taking hormones to change their gender, and have a lot of gender non-binary or fluid patients. So we're just trying to get away from gendered language, but I was a women's studies minor too. And so as a feminist, I really understand where you're coming from, but I think being inclusive in our language doesn't take away from having a feminist value system.
I mean, I see it slightly different than Debbie. I mean, no profound disagreement. I mean, I see your point, Alexis, that to lose the historical category of women is a very serious thing. I mean, in other words, there is, I mean, it is really important to speak of women's history throughout the ages. Perhaps some of us on this call were deeply shaped by second wave feminism, also known as the women's movement. So to me, it is complicated to give it up. I mean, my way of dealing with it, I mean, of course, I deal with it as a scholar. I mean, not as a practitioner, but what a number of us who write about abortion and about reproductive health, we use both. You know, both are true. I mean, it can be both and. Absolutely, there are trans men who get pregnant and need abortions. It's a very small number, but they're there. So we have to acknowledge that reality. We also have to acknowledge the reality that there are numerous reports that a lot of the people who come to abortion clinics do not use this language. They think of themselves as women. So it's complicated. What are we, you know, what message are we giving them if we deny what they think about themselves? So it's not a simple problem, but as problems go, it's surmountable compared to the other problems we have, which at this moment really seem far more insurmountable.
Okay, do we have any more questions or comments? Raise your hand if you do. I just would like you to talk briefly about another possible consequence, which would be the removal of judicial access to a judge's decision that allows a minor to have an abortion. That another possibility of another consequence would be that will be challenged in those very same states where that is so essential to protect the safety of teenagers who are threatened both by being pregnant as well as by the possible action of their own parents.
Well, in some states, some states have parental notification laws. Some states have parental consent laws. So today we don't live in a society where all teenagers can get an abortion confidentially. I mean, there is something called judicial bypass. So for example, in states that have parental notification or parental consent laws, you can go, I mean, and here's where the pro-choice lawyers have been heroic. The ACLU and similar pro bono law groups, you can go before a judge, you can tell the judge why you think you need an abortion, and you would be harmed, your parents would throw you out of the house or whatever. So there is an escape clause, but imagine a 15-year-old girl having to go before a judge and talk about the most intimate details of her life. All of which is to say, even today, we don't uniformly recognize the rights of teenagers to have abortions without parental involvement. And Sherry, oh, excuse me. Sherry, thank you for your comment in the, Sherry's comment in the chat log said that the procedure in question that she was remembering was a very specialized one.
Yep. Okay, thank you all of you for listening, for I hope taking everything to heart, for your questions. Debbie and Carol, thank you so much for enlightening everybody and sharing your very deep and lifelong commitment to protecting women and pregnant people. And I hope to see all of you next week. And like I said, if you have a friend who should have been here, but was watching the basketball game, just direct them to the website where they can watch the recording. Thank you so much, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.